because they were so good at becoming second for such a long time, a lot of people just hated them.
There's other teams out there who can overtake them.
No, I'm actually going to disagree with you on this one. Here's why. Right, we have returned for another episode of Counterpoints. Nowadays, I work the Blast events, sort of, and Pimp doesn't, sort of. Who knows on that one, actually? I'm being playful with that. We can't really know what the future holds, obviously. And we'll start actually with Blast. Let's just go straight into all the Blast topics, because actually, Pimp, one thing, obviously I do a lot of talk shows. I do try to figure out on my shows, what the angle is going to be. And crucially, because I'm a pro, I don't just do the thing where you react like a plant reacted to sunlight the same way. I try to make it where, I vary up which parts of the take I use on which shows. So I will say, from doing an episode of Snake and Banter in the style of Talking Counter, where we were just in a hotel room with all scuffed set up and webcam was all blurry and we had the mics in our hands. On that show, I had Vu and Maui, who obviously were the ones who worked the Blast Bounty. And one thing that I thought was funny was I didn't expect this. I actually thought that everyone was just going to be overwhelmingly praising MOUZ for winning the event because, they looked pretty dominant in the final. They had a really good performance across the board. You had a bunch of people. Torgy was MVP candidate. Spinks did win the MVP. People don't know he's never won one before, even though he's been a HL TV top X player many, many times. But what I was kind of shocked by at the end was, even though because I'm just low-key not like a big fan of this particular roster construction, like I am one of those role cells, Pimp. I do sort of think like people have positions and styles generally, and you can have a bit of wiggle room, or if you're a brilliant player, sometimes you can adapt. But I do think in general, to use football terminology, you don't make a left winger a left back. You know what I mean? Especially not if you could just get a left back in that scenario. You maybe, again, for like an England team, maybe you do it for one game to get a brilliant player for that one match because it makes sense. So with all that said, I'm actually low-key skeptical of MOUZ, even in spite of winning Blast Bounty. But as we were sort of figuring out what we're going to start with here, you like it. You're impressed. You like the new MOUZ.
I do. I know we spoke about them in one of our earlier episodes as well, and I raised the concerns, as you also did, in terms of the roles, in terms of actually having the right personnel, PR coming in, xertioN as an in-game leader. There was a lot of question marks attached to MOUZ, and that was the main reason why I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to back them up. I think for my money, obviously, it's one tournament, and recency bias will play in a little bit. Winning that tournament, I did not see that coming at all. I think that was highly impressive, especially the fashion they did it in the grand final. Sure, you can argue, Donk, Spirit having an off day, all those kind of things, but at the end of the day, I feel like there's always, two truth to something like that, where, Donk didn't have a great game, but I also do think MOUZ deserved quite a lot of credit for not making the playing field for him easy by playing good Counter-Strike themselves. And there's a few angles that I want to attack with MOUZ and a few things that maybe I was reminded of when I was watching MOUZ throughout that tournament, because I feel like we've been treating MOUZ, and I speak as a general community right now, and by all means, if you don't agree, then feel free to disagree, but because they were so good at becoming second for such a long time, a lot of people just hated them, right? A lot of people just never fancied them, and a lot of people didn't like them, and they didn't get the credit they really deserved. They were, for the vast majority of time, in a period where Vitality were unbeatable. They were the second best team, maybe at worst the third best team in the world. And that doesn't go away from one day to another, especially not when you're chasing Broland for a guy like PR in that essence, right? Or xelex coming in, and you're basically adding more firepower to the team on the basis of maybe becoming a little bit less tactical, or at least taking a bigger gamble on xertioN as an in-game leader compared to Broland. So there was always an upside to those moves by bringing in PR and xelex, but it was just uncertain in terms of their roles, positions, whether it could work out. And also, even more so, the question for me is, how long would it take before they would figure out, some of those roles, or before some of those players would transition into becoming better in the roles? As you described so beautifully before, right? You can transform a great midfielder into a left back, or left back into a midfielder, like we've seen with some of the popular players in football as of right now. I think Reece James is the greatest example of that in Chelsea. He's always been a back. He's always been one of the best left backs, right backs in the world of football, and now he's starting to play more and more as a central midfielder or as a defensive midfielder. So you could do that, but it takes time before they get to that full potential. I saw a MOUZ that seemingly had it figured out way quicker than I thought would be possible. And some of the players would also fit into those roles much better. And then I was also reminded, and I think I did a tweet about that as well, that we, in that period where MOUZ were the second best, third best team in the world, also somehow forgot how good Spinks is. because I feel like the notion is that he's a good player, but nobody really consider him great, right? It's the same thing when you discuss, maybe to a less degree nowadays, with Blame F, where it's like, yeah, he's a good player, but he's a beta, and he has that stigma, and he has that repetition where people almost automatically take 5-10% of his performances just by the fact that he has a repetition of being a beta or being something he's maybe not anymore. And I think the same goes for Spinks. I think Chad Sponge has been one of the guys advocating for that a lot, saying that he often, when he watches Spinks, is seeing a guy that is a bit too scared to make the right moves and is a little bit playing on the back foot and maybe to some degrees baiting. And I've agreed with Chad many times. It does feel like Spinks has that tendency sometimes when he's not feeling comfortable, but we saw clearly here at Blast that he also has the ability and the capabilities to be a player that not necessarily dominates the server, but has a huge amount of impact on the server when he's not afraid of making the plays and not afraid of making the moves. And that's a Spinks with confidence. Having that guy on your team is always a big win condition to be up there with the best of the best. I think people forget how good he is and how good he were in ends, how good he at times were in Vitality, and then maybe from a personality standpoint and what we kind of heard between the lines from Vitality and from Apex, maybe he's not always the easiest teammate to play with, but he's definitely a quality player. You mix that in with a team that has now, when you look at them, they have more firepower. There's no negating the fact that bringing in xelex and bringing in PR, that's more firepower than having Jimfat and Brolan, if you combine the two players in that regard. You have xertioN as an in-game leader who has endlessly more firepower than Brolan in that regard, and it's worked out pretty well so far. And then the last point that surprised me the most, and is still... This is where it kind of splits for me. This is where I think, okay, MOUZ can maybe once again become a team where we have to have them in the conversation between being the second best, third best team in the world, which they were for a long time. That was tozzy performing well. You even said it yourself, right? He was an MVP candidate, and that was his best event. And I just looked it up. That was his best event, statistically speaking, since the Shanghai Major, I believe, in 24.
Sure.
We kind of, to some degree, forgot, or didn't really forget. Tozzy's been underwhelming for quite some time. I think there's been a couple of tournaments where I'm like, I want more from you. And I was even at certain times in that MOUZ period thinking to myself, if there was only just a better AWP who could join, then maybe he would be worth a replacement. But as we discussed many times, there's no good AWPers out there. So it's pretty safe to be a mediocre AWP at the moment. But Tozzy was anything but mediocre at Blast, and I think he found a new level, and I think maybe, and this is my big question moving forward for MOUZ, because I think that's necessary. Like, if MOUZ wants to be the second best, third best team in the world, we need to see Tozzy play at close to that level. He doesn't have to be an MVP candidate at all tournaments, but he needs to produce, let's say, 1.15, 1.20 rating more often than not, which hasn't been the case for quite some time. I think with the fresh look at how they play, with the playmakers coming in, with xelex, with PR, with him having more freedom on the server, at least that's the way I sense it from xertioN, it does feel like Tozzy is able and basically allowed to do whatever he wants to do in a system that is a bit more free-flowing now, in a system that maybe hasn't settled yet, because, again, as we spoke about with the roles, the firepower, the rifles, I think that's where xertioN is focusing on the most. So it does feel like the leash is off Tozzy, and so far he passed that test pretty high, and I think if he can find a rhythm in that, and if he can find some sort of a median level in that regard, it doesn't have to be an MVP candidate, then I see MOUZ being back to their best, because you cannot tell me that a Tozzy playing well, a Spinks playing well, and then the rifling core of xelex and PR, with xertioN being the in-game leader as a rifle, that's enough firepower to be scary to pretty much any team out there. And then maybe they're compromising a bit on the roles. Maybe one of the players on certain maps, certain positions have to be retaught or have to learn certain stuff. But the fact that it works so well at Blast already by now, the fact that I know they've been practicing quite a lot leading up to that tournament because they wanted to get off to a strong start. They wanted to prove to the world that it was going to be great. I was very impressed with MOUZ. So I don't think it was necessarily a fluke per se. Again, if they play a grand final versus Spirit 3 more times throughout the year, I'd probably have feared Spirit winning the most of those grand finals. But I wouldn't deem it unreasonable to see MOUZ consistently getting into the playoff, and I wouldn't deem it impossible for them to maybe be in contention for another trophy. So in that regard, it depends on what we set the bar. But I must admit, I was very impressed with how mature the team looked, despite having made, as we described and as everyone else has described as well, big roster changes, both in terms of the in-game leading positions, in terms of some of the new personnel coming in, and xelex being inexperienced, and PR being somewhat inexperienced as well, and have to occupy new roles. I think it was way more impressive than I would have dreamt of, and that gives me a bit of hope that MOUZ, as they've been before, the core of that lineup have been top 3 in the world, top 2 in the world for more than a year. Why not aim for that again?
Okay, that was a little bit more attempt than I expected. When you said they were good, it was more like a mixed bag there. So I'm not that far off myself. So what I'll do is I'll give my take, and then we'll do like a more concrete, where are they? What's the trajectory at the end, right? So I'll do the bad first, the good first, sorry. Then I can do what I'm more critical of. So the things I actually think are good is like, look, first of all, at that performance, yeah, obviously the Torji performance was unbelievable. If basically Spinks had played a little bit worse in the final, they'd probably still win the final, but at that point, Torji would get the MVP. Obviously, if you don't know how HLTV works, it's actually quite logical why they gave it to Spinks. Not only was he very good in the final, but obviously because of the nature of the bounty format and the fact that all the big top teams got knocked out, Spirit was the only like big name team they played. So I'm sorry, if you know how HLTV is, one, it's already the final. They're going to give that more weighting anyway. And then two, if what you do is do it against one of the best teams in the world, you're going to get more props than that than doing it against 3D Max and fucking Astralis. I'm sorry, that's just the way anyone's brain would work. So I get that. That's why Torji didn't win MVP. But obviously, right up until the final, his numbers were unbelievable. I think before the final, he was on like a 1.4 rating or something. Now, here's the obvious issue with that. As you said earlier, that doesn't happen in Torji's career. Now, sure, this is a new lineup. It's true. There could be a different angle. I'll even give you actually a little angle I've got on that I think people have missed, which is, bro, I love certain stats just to like, I always tell people I use stats as like a question or a signpost, not like the answer. So this is one where it's actually something I was thinking about watching the game, and when I looked it up, the stat lines up with exactly what I was thinking. So one of the problems Torji's always had to be a star in MOUZ is as they got more and more of the big name riflers in the team, it's actually obvious he is sort of, I wouldn't say as a support AWPer, but he's just more of like, he's not the AWPer who gets any play around him or set up. He's not like they get pretty sweet. Even Grix in Big gets this, where they'll hold the round and they'll set him up for like the mid shot on the dust two doors and they'll let him duel he doesn't get any of that, mate. He's just a guy playing in the game. He just happens to hold an AWP is what I've always thought about Torji. So as a result, if you look at his career, that's why actually a good Torji performance is usually like, not a 1.07 rating. He's not even close to them on a season, all those star AWPers of the world. Well, one thing that's actually crazy about this new MOUZ that I'll say I think might be a reason why he had this performance is if you go and look, it is crazy. At this tournament, bro, for the opening T-side attempts, he had 6.9 kills attempts on T-side, right? That is inhuman. That is below Brad Brokey. That's like half of like what a Shiro would do. Now, here's the reason why I think logically that is the case and why he actually shone at this event is the one part about this roster where if this is sycrone's real plan, we'll find out in the future, he might actually be a genius, bro. Maybe he understands something about like CS that I don't, which is if you do look at the idea, xertioN's going to be the IGL. And if you watch, he is doing it a little bit like, I wouldn't say more like Liquid Twistzz, where I always thought what Liquid Twistzz did was, because at the time he didn't volunteer, it's something that happened when other people left the team or were bad at IGLing. That's almost like Twistzz was like, I've always said, here's the difference for IGLs that are like fraggers. It's not like you're saying, I'm becoming an IGL. Instead, what you say is the following sentence, I can do it for now, right? That's a very different proposition because I can do it for now implies to me, I'm still going to basically play my game, but while doing that, I can call a bit. So basically, in that, if I'm a star, probably going to call around myself a little bit because I've already got my game going. I can sort of ensure that, and I can actually explain to other people, by the way, what I want. I think xertioN looks way more like that type of IGL. In fact, people have speculated in past versions of MOUZ, if you ever watch him on certain T-sets, it looked like he was sort of calling anyway at times. So I would imagine, nothing crazy has changed in that sense. So I was making this like theory craft on the core stream, which is here's where, if you're actually sycrone, it's kind of genius that you've let xertioN be the IGL, because what you've done with your recruitments, as far as I can tell, is actually sort of like plaster up what would be all the crazy holes when someone like xertioN starts to be like the full IGL. So here's the obvious angle, which is since they've recruited loads of other players that like xertioN, like to take the initiative and take the opening kill, and wherever position they are on the map, take a duel. Because you've signed like two of those guys and you already had xertioN, what you've basically done, think about the two elements of what I'm doing with xertioN and Torji here, is if you are xertioN, you don't have to actually have some unbelievable mid-round or some unbelievable call. You just have to basically do the initial call. And those players, remember, we don't have the old Apex entries. They're already on positions on the map. They're already going to take a fight if they see it. And by the way, once you take fights and you win duels, a round naturally goes to an end point anyway. The site that you go to becomes obvious. The next move becomes obvious. Actually, the hardest part in Counter-Strike usually is getting the first kill. That's why if you notice, people like the Carragans and Falcons, first thing they do is go and work with Kiyosuke and figure out how we're going to get these bloody entries and what happens if I run in first. Do we even get on the site? You worry about that before you worry about, the things we all think about IGL, like the brilliant mid-round. And a lot of that stuff's, that's like advanced PhD stuff you got to figure out later on in this process. So one, I actually think think this has somewhat made it easier. In fact, if you go and look, the whole bunch of these players took like 20 plus opening kill attempts, which actually implies what I'm saying has a logic to it. And then here's where I actually think Torji benefited from this. If you are Torji, it might sound negative that I just said, you know, the AWP, but you never get an opening. Bro, this implies they're all just riflers going and doing their shit. And he's just floating around the back of the fucking pack, you know. He's taking a shot here, he's taking one there. They run on the site, he trades the guy. Like, that actually, listen, I don't think that will happen again. I think those numbers are absurd. And part of them probably, let's be real, is a factor of playing 3D Max and Astralis. But I'll tell you what, that's not a bad concept. You can see how I'm trying to think more from sycrone's position as like the chess master here, how these pieces are all going to interact, even if separately. He might have never told Torji to do that. He might have never told xertioN that's what the signings are for. So I think those are all really positive things. Yeah, I'm with you. Like, that looked awesome. The obvious question becomes when it's not just Spirit one time where they play a bit bad, when you actually have to play, you know, Falcons in a quarterfinal, into a Na'Vi semi-final, into Vitality in the final. What happens then when you do that? Like, you know, does that actually work each time? Is that trickier than it looked in this particular case? That's the obvious concern I have, because I actually do think at this event, despite the fact they won it, it's funny that actually PR dropped the trophy on his head, because I actually thought he was kind of a bit mid at this tournament, man. It didn't do that many players that impressed me. I kind of thought that was one of those examples where you won, and it's like, I wouldn't go too crazy yourself over that, mate. Like, you know, that doesn't mean you've suddenly leveled up and you're a champion. That's more like Spinks was unbelievable and Torji had the tournament of his life, you know. Like, we'll wait a few tournaments before we decide whether, you know, this was a good signing in your case or not. And then the other thing as well I have is, this is the downside. Now I'll go on to the downside. The downside is this. I do think people need to go back and watch the other two series they played here. They could literally, in both times, have been 2-0'd by both 3D Max and by Astralis. And actually, this is why, you know, having stars helps. It was just fragging got them out of it. They did that thing where you're in like 2vx's and 1vx's and you're having halves that are getting dodgy, and then you just frag you out of it. Problem with that is that's obviously really hard to make work long term. And again, when the level of opposition is better, eventually that'll catch you out. That you put yourself in enough bad situations, you won't frag you out of them. So that's my biggest problem is I like some of the elements of it. I actually think I said this is another angle. I also think it reminds me more of how actually, even though I think this is a sycrone built team, actually reminds me of how people in CS 1.6 used to make teams. They never thought about roles, bro. They just recruited what they thought were good, skilled players, and then you just figure it out after that. You know, I assume going to your first scrim, or you see who plays a spot better, and then eventually, if it all works out, you just have a team. And yeah, maybe this guy used to be a star in another team, but he's not on this team. He's just like, you know, a skilled person who plays the B anchor or something. They have a little bit more of that vibe about them. So I'm with you. Look, there's a lot of positives. It's just I do think some of it's sort of like padded by the bad teams at the tournament. Sure. So I actually, like, the saddest thing of all, I think, if you're MOUZ is, I don't even need Spirit to win the game. Just give me normal Donk. You know what I mean? Let me just have the normal Donk play, and then I'd give them a lot more credit, because I also think Donk just actually looked shit on some of these maps, bro. So I would say this. You were quite positive. It sounds like I was quite negative, because I was trying to like offset some of the elements. If you're going to be positive, here's what I need to know. In like 2 months, are they like, you know, the real fourth best team in the world? Are they like actually in all the semis or something? What's the trajectory for here from what you're liking?
Yeah, I think they will be. Yeah, I think they'll be in contention. Like whether the third, fourth, fifth, I think they'll definitely be in that conversation. I think you nailed it pretty well with the whole Torji point. It reminds me of what I think, you know, is needed to be done with a lot of AWPers these days, because we've been speaking a lot about, it's been AWPer's paradise. Like, it's never been a better time to be a bad AWPer, because you can't get replaced. There's no one good out there. I don't know if this is intentional, and it may not be. It may have been part of the conversations, and I may give Torji and MOUZ credit for something they haven't, come up with on purpose, that just accidentally happened. But they're almost setting it up as if he were a Guardian back in the old days within Na'Vi. Okay. When you have three riflers like PR, like xelex, like xertioN for that matter as well, who are all aggressive, as you said, they kind of take the majority share of going for the opening kills, all of them above 20%, etc., etc. I agree, you cannot have an AWPer who's down to 6.8, I believe it was, in that T side throughout that tournament. That is crazy, as you said it, and I think he was only successful in 25% of the...
Exactly, it's wild, isn't it?
It was crazy. It was crazy. But you also, as you said, you're setting up an AWPer who's no longer have to do that. And Torji that's never been his forte. That's never been what he wanted to do as an AWPer. He's never been hyper aggressive. He's never been going for all those opening kills. If you look at some of the other tournaments as well, when he was playing with Brolan, it was also quite low, not as low, but it was down there. He's one of the least aggressive AWPers on the T side. And that's not, what he likes to do on the server. Now he's all of a sudden allowed not to be that. He's not forced, or he doesn't feel any external pressure to do it, because there's enough opening firepower with the rifles. And that allows him to become what I would describe, hopefully for the future, sort of like the guardian of MOUZ, where he's always alive in the 3v3, in the 4v4.
Okay.
He can pose up in an afterplant scenario. He can get the easy transition kills when someone is rotating off a bomb site, going into a new position. He can be that. Like, I remember playing Guardian, like, he's one of the most annoying oppers ever to be up against. I would much rather face Kenny S. I would much rather face Amonisi, where you go head to head, you take the duel, and yeah, sometimes you lose that duel, or more often than not, you lost to Kenny S back in the days. But constantly being picked apart by a guy who's just standing in T-spawn like Guardian did for Na'Vi, round after round after round, he would deal damage through the double doors. You could never rotate between A and B and Dust 2, because he would always hold that angle before the smokes were as powerful as they were today. That was the most annoying player to be up against, and I see a lot of that in Torsi. I see that kind of player he's pretty reliable in terms of hitting the easy shots, and he has that, just like Guardian, he has that explosivity to him that when let's say he's defending A long on Dust 2, he's placed by car, he has that ability to maneuver the smokes, maneuver the grenades, and sort of like explode in his own little circle. People often mistake, being an explosive AWPer as being like a Amonisi that goes in your face, that jumps around and does all sorts of crazy flicks, etc., etc. You can be explosive in your own way, in terms of, okay, you operate in a small circle or you operate in a small area, but once the players are coming at you, you're explosive in terms of how you maneuver that small area. And I think Torsi is very good at that. So I don't know if that's something MOUZ have looked into, if that's sycrone, if that's Torsi, but if they continue to rely as much as they are on the riflers, in terms of getting the opening kills, in terms of having a lot of aggressive playmakers, Torsi is not needed in that department. Naturally, as you said as well, when you play Vitality, when you play Spirit, when Dunk, it'd be nice if he had the ability, and that's something you can always discuss, like we do with Shiro. Sometimes we've been arguing that, yeah, he's great, but you'd like to see a little bit more versatile play coming out for him, or sometimes help out in the opening kill department. I'm not sort of like freeing Torsi from that responsibility. All I'm saying is, if you can create a mini Guardian in that is just constantly a thorn in the side of whoever you play, whenever they want to make rotations, whenever they're playing a little bit more static Counter-Strike, I see his value being maximized in a position like that, and I will see his stats go up in a position like that. So I hope that's sort of like the direction they're heading. So for me, yeah, I think MOUZ have enough firepower. I think they have enough experience as a team as well. I think it comes down to me whether or not Torsi can continue to perform at a higher level. As said, I don't need him to be an MVP candidate. I don't need him to post a 1.2 rating at every single event, because as you said, like, he's been averaging, I think, 1.04 for the vast majority of last year and this year as well. So just a small uptick in performance, and then naturally it comes down to exertion, because I also do agree with you. It was the first tournament for MOUZ, right? There were a couple of games where you'd argue, they got bailed out by firepower. But a lot of teams get bailed out by firepower when you're playing teams like 3D Max, when you're playing Astralis. And that's fair enough. It's just whether or not you consistently can do that and then tournament by tournament get better from a tactical point of view. And if this is the first iteration of MOUZ, if it's to be expected that they get better, that they get to know each other better, that xertioN gains more experience as an in-game leader, that Torsi finds a little bit more comfort in his, I wouldn't say new role in MOUZ, but maybe finds more comfort in the fact that now he's surrounded by a lot of aggressive riflers where he doesn't have to do anything unless he really wants to, I can most definitely see MOUZ be a top 4 team for the future as well.
Okay.
I will maybe even go back and look at the earlier episode that we did, where my big concerns were the roles, with PR coming in, the inexperience, you name it. And maybe I was a little bit too soon to jump the gun in that regard. Personally, I have this little vendetta against experience in Counter-Strike. I think it is important, but we make it way more important than it actually is in a lot of scenarios. Maybe that's a conversation for another time. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna sound like a guy who's just turned on a plate, from watching one tournament. But I see more positives in MOUZ than I did coming into that tournament. And I think if you can win a tournament like the Bounty, to say that they can't be a top 4 team, knowing the core of the team have been the second best team in the world for more than a year, to me that'd be silly.
Okay, here's the thing. Maybe Pimp's turned over a new leaf here, because here's the thing. I'm still on all the shit we said in that last episode, man. One of the things about me is I always, my joke is in esports, I'm like one of those Ents from Lord of the Rings, those trees where they're like, like, I just view things in years and decades, bro. I've just been here forever, so I've seen it all. So the problem is when something comes along that's like an anomaly, it's rare that this happens. I actually have to go, whoa, let's chill out. Like, I'll tell people an example. When actually that amazing Katowice happened in 2024, before where Donk went mental and Spirit was insane. Even Zontics had crazy numbers, if you remember. I remember telling people, even though that is one of the best tournaments I've ever seen from a player, I'm still going to actually have to be mildly skeptical because will that ever happen again? Like, is that just a one-off? Now, look, Donk actually proved to be the ultimate outlier. Obviously, yeah, he is actually that good. He could do it again. You might even argue he might have had better tournaments since then. But most of the times when I do that, I'm going to be right. Like history tells me that is how it goes. So actually, yeah, we should actually on a different podcast do the experience thing because I'm with you to a degree, but I think we come down on a different like part of the spectrum, as it were. Because I would say this, I think when you get at the end of your career, like you're like a Rain or something, I think people do probably overrate the experience there. Like a lot of the times you are not going to be in some amazing position where you win a 1vx. You're just usually going to be in a normal duel, and you look, Rain has good aim, but he's not as good as 2015 in Rain's aim or whatever. So that's where actually maybe it's better to have some young hot fragger who just shoots him in the head with a crosshair. With that said, my issue is it sounds to me more like you're on the, let's get all these 17 and 18-year-olds who are talented, we'll craft them into players. It's like, yeah, but my problem there is how long does the crafting part take? If that takes a year, I don't always have that if I'm on a team that can win now. Also, again, which other pieces do I have in my team? I also think another thing people miss is it's not one or the other. You don't have to like bring in 4 young guys like that. If you bring in 1 in, maybe that can happen. Like I think that's actually one of the interesting things about FaZe. They tried bringing 1 in, but it didn't seem like it was a team that wanted to bring a young player in and develop him. They're a team that wanted people who were already mega and could just play the game and you didn't have to tell them, and then you just made the brilliant mid-round. So what I'll say is this, I'm going to disagree with you on the placing. I actually am good. This is the perfect time for me to say, actually, no, I'm not buying the stock of MOUZ. I don't think they're going to be top 4. I think actually this was a crazy miracle run. I actually think even with that, they had some dodgy-ass performances. I don't know yet if they, like for example, if Torshi can play like that again. So I'm going to be more of a hater and say, I think they're going to be more towards the bottom end of the top 10, sort of like 8th to 10th type position, which still can be relevant, by the way. You can still be in some playoffs doing that. You could still have a good run. By the way, obviously, if you go to a smaller, I don't know, PGL or something, you could have a bracket where you could make a run. But the idea, top 4 to me is like, realistic, you should be in semis. That should be your expectation. And then you see what happens based on form, the opponent. I don't personally think they're going to do that. Like, I'll give them full props for this, actually, without doing it, because I've done it a million times on other shows. I'm a big Spinks fan. I actually do think he's a really talented player. Yeah. I've agreed with past problems about his style. I just think a lot of that's out of date, actually. I think if you ever go and look, you'd be surprised. He's a lot more aggressive than he was. A lot of that he's a beta thing was like early vitality when he was getting adjusted, and you got to go and look at the players he was playing with. So I think actually he's much more aggressive player, a bit like Blame F, fully enough. That's also like some really out of date shit, the idea he just baits all. That's like when he used to be fucking, I think maybe in beginning of Astralis, like 4 or 5 years ago at this point in time. So I don't worry about those negatives. I think if you just go and watch this tournament here and you watch Spinks take duels, he is unfucking believable mechanically, mate. He just wins so many duels. And a player like that, I actually think it's logical why they're going to have a little bit of pause to their game. Because when you're a super talented, like really consistent rifle like that, you're not just going to run around a corner, mate. You're going to take the duel where you win the duel. You're going to set it up and sort of use a bit of like gamesmanship and understanding of what's happening in the game. So yeah, I don't worry about that part too much. I just think it'll be more like 10th down. But anyway.
Yeah. I think part of my issue as well, and part of what makes me saying that I do believe that'll be top 4, top 5 is also the competition. I'll be completely honest. Navi haven't made the roster change that Navi haven't made the roster change that I wanted them to do, and I think they were looking into. Maybe they didn't find the right fit. Maybe they decided to give it another go. Maybe they didn't want to. Who knows? I don't think Furia have looked great, in particularly so far, and I don't know what it is with Furia, but this whole fallen, retiring, knowing you're playing with a guy who's not going to continue with you, etc., etc. I raised my concerns a couple of times in our episodes. I'll do it one more time here as well. I don't see a reason why MOUZ should be worse off than Furia or why they should be worse off than Navi. I think they'll be on par with them, which means that in my book, I have
that makes sense.
Falcons. Yeah, I have Falcons up there. I have Vitality now that even they're playing with a stand-in in JL as well.
That's true.
To say the MOUZ can't win against them if they line up in a bracket in a quarterfinal or in a semifinal. So I think the feel of the competition as well haven't really convinced me based on what we saw at the later stages of last season and also coming into the first tournament here. We'll probably know more after EWC in a couple of weeks' time, but I don't see a reason why MOUZ shouldn't be able to compete against those guys. And I will say, if I have MOUZ going up against G2, or if I have MOUZ going up against the new Aurora, or if I have MOUZ playing Bitboom, or if I have MOUZ playing 9C, who's currently in top 10 as well, I'll go with MOUZ any given day, right? So for me to place them 6, 7, 8, that'd be saying that I think they're as good as 9C, as good as G2, as good as Aurora maybe, or the new FaZe, who knows? And I think MOUZ is significantly better. So I do think that there's definitely a window right now, and just like we treated the old version of MOUZ as well, when they first brought in Brolan, when they first I guess had Jimfat on the lineup as well, and we were all saying, okay, instead of Shuhei, you bring in Brolan, inexperienced in-game leader, never going to work out, you're never going to be a top 5 team. All I'm saying is they were the second best team for at least 8 months straight, and those players, that they were the spearhead of them being as good as they were. To me, that was Torsi performing on the big stage. It was xertioN being hyper aggressive as a rifle, really finding a lot of impact. And as you said, it was Spinks at times being a world-class Counter-Strike player, and that's still the core of MOUZ. And I don't think PR and xelex necessarily are. Again, I don't think, they haven't really earned the rights to say that they are on the level of a Jimfat when he was great or something like that. But I definitely think they have the potential to do so. I think PR in particular have shown before that he could be at that level. So I think there's enough for me to say that I'd expect them to be fourth or fifth. And there's enough for me to say, when you look at the level of the competition as well, that I don't really think Aurora or G2 or BetBoom or FaZe or whoever you want to put in that contention is going to be better than MOUZ. So maybe we'll place them as 5th or 6th, but they will open a gap then down to the remaining of the teams.
No, by the way, it makes a lot more sense when you actually just list the teams like that, because I've got to say, I will take most of those teams to be better. Listen, I'm with you on maybe 9Z. I actually think they might be just a tiny bit overrated because of the major. Actually, I think G2 is actually where I expect MOUZ to be. I think that's the sort of team also. It's good players in theory, a little bit flawed. You don't know if you can win the big semi-final, But if I look at the others, this is where I'll disagree. I do think Fury and Na'Vi are just better sets of players. I don't know what the form will be like. The Vitality one throws a little bit of a spanner in the works, as it were, because who knows? They could actually just be shit at both those tournaments. We can't even know it, especially the one without Apex. I think people are missing that one. Maybe GL can replace Mezzi. I don't know what the fuck. I assume the logic is Mezzi IGLs when Apex is in there. I don't even know if that works, mate. That's one of those ones where I don't think they do when you just go to the tournament. Actually, if anything, I imagine you just go and you have the expectation we just see what happens. You don't put any pressure, you just see it. So I'll say I'm going to stick with it. They'll be at 8th to 10th. But this leads into another discussion from the bounty, because over on the old poly market, if you go to the prop section here, there's one that I thought was perfect to discuss in light of what just happened at Blast Bounty, which is this one. Will FaZe win a Tier 1 event in 2026? It's actually at 19% overall at the moment. It's past being as high as 29%. I think that was just before the actual playoffs of Blast Bounty, because people saw the fields where worse, etc. Right? Here's the thing, Pip. The obvious angle is this. All I want to know is, do you think they will win? And if you were to pick yes or no for this, which would you take?
I would 100% pick no, and I'd stand by that. I think the only chance they had of winning a trophy this season was if they were to win it at the Blast Bounty. I think everything, as we discussed in the earlier episode as well, you had this online portion of it. You had a lot of teams coming in after the player break. You had roster changes. I think that was the perfect storm for FaZe to come in and maybe snatch away a trophy, or at least having a decent chance of winning a trophy. I, under no circumstances, see FaZe as a team that beats the likes of G2 in consistently in playoff games, or the likes of MOUZ consistently in playoff games. And that's what we discussed about in the earlier episode as well. FaZe may, if they surprise me as well, get into the playoff, but from the playoff, from the quarterfinal to the grand final and winning the tournament, you have to beat 3 teams who on paper are better than you in a row, and most likely have to do it in a best of 5 grand final as well, depending on what tournament it is. I simply don't see a world where that's happening. I'm very pleased with what I saw from FaZe. They were better, more competitive. Good to see Frozen. Good to see Twistzz play at that level as well. Good to see that the new guys coming in also showing a bit of potential and showing that they are maybe, the best way to describe it to me at least, is worth the time of Twistzz and worth the time of Frozen. But there's a long way for me before I'll even consider FaZe winning a Tier 1 trophy, to be honest. So I think 19% is very generous at the moment. And if it was me, I would go in and I'd say no 100%. I just don't see it, even with Vitality playing with a stand-in. Yes. That doesn't affect FaZe Clan. That affects whether MOUZ is more likely to win a trophy, or whether Na'Vi is more likely to win a trophy. Not FaZe. We're talking a team in first division versus the team that is currently the best in the world when it comes to Vitality. Yes. So I'll be honest, it's a big fat no for me.
I've got to say I'm going to go with no as well. Even though a 19% chance, you'd think if I'm going to take, because I could get great value, what if they get a run? The problem is that I've already just seen them not do that, Pim. I'm with you. I actually think the crazy thing is they just had their chance to do it. I will talk about it in 1 second when I switch off the screen. I think they genuinely could, maybe even should, with the way the game was going, have beaten Spirit in that semi-final. With that said, though, even then, people forget this detail. That would be fine if then Spirit smashed the final. Because Spirit themselves lost, I actually imagine, based on what I saw, MOUZ would have beaten them in the final. It probably would have been 3-1 MOUZ even then against FaZe. So that makes me say no. And then also, actually, we'll switch over in a second. I just saw some things about FaZe that make me question them. So let's just do it. Let's just have the conversation about FaZe. So obviously, you have to say, looking at that event, what a great performance. Like, you can actually argue in terms of overall play at the time, maybe they were even the second best team after MOUZ. Like, Spirit looked a bit sus at times, mate. They got through with having people frag out and having star players and hero calls and things that maybe shouldn't even happen. So I want to know, what do you like, what don't you like about this phase?
I still think there's a lack of quality in players, to be honest. I mean, it may sound harsh to say, right? I think we can judge Jacob now. He's been in FaZe for a long time. There's a lot of data on him, you know. He had a decent event by, you know, you follow people on HLTV, you follow Twitter, you follow some of those conversations, they're making it up as, oh, that's his breakthrough, and now he's finally showing what he's good at, etc. Like, he was average, you know, maybe slightly below average, or he was better than what he's shown beforehand, but he's not a player that comes in as the third star of that lineup, you know, and elevates them to a point where I will put them in the same category as MOUZ or as G2, you name it, right? If Jacob is your third best player on paper, or is supposed to be your third best player within FaZe Clan, that means that you're at best a top 10 team, which is what I think of FaZe Clan right now. That's not to say that Jacob can't do the job within FaZe Clan. That's not to say that FaZe is not doing better than I expected, but that's sort of like where I set the bar as of right now. So the overall lack of quality in that regard. Jobone, I think he was the one that caused the most, you know, interest, you know, by playing as well as he did in the beginning for FaZe Clan, showing glimpses of what maybe he can be in the future and what maybe he can find in terms of consistency. I think it was a big test for him as well to be on LAN and playing some of these games. And I don't know how you saw his performances, and I don't really want to judge a player based on, you know, a couple of maps. You know, I want to see a bit more from him, but it's pretty evident to me, and that goes back to what you were saying before. I want to see that performance that we saw in some of those online games and early on from J-Bone. I want to see that consistently over a period of 2 to 3 months before I change my perspective on him, because it's hard for me to believe that a player was benched in Big is now coming into FaZe Clan and is the reason why they're getting better, and there's the reason why we talk about them as potentially winning a tier 1 trophy. It doesn't make any sense, as I said in the earlier episode with the football reference as well. Like, if you're benched in Real Sociedad in La Liga, you're not walking into Manchester United's starting 11 and all of a sudden making them the best team in the Premier League. It's as simple as that. Maybe he gets better over time. Maybe he finds a way to be an impact player. Maybe he gets to be, in football terms, a substitute player that sometimes can come in and affect the outcome of a game. But you're not going to come in and become a regular starter in Manchester United starting 11, elevating their level, you know, even so to a high level. So I have a very tough time seeing that. So it may sound a bit simplified to that degree, but I really do think that if everyone would just sit down and look at the lineup and look at the quality of players they have to work with, I don't see any reason why FaZe should be better than what they were at Bounty, or better than a top 8, top 9, top 10. Which also, if you then zoom out, is way, way better than the way with Kerrigan. Is way, way better than the old version of FaZe that didn't qualify for the major, right? So is that not acceptable? I'd say that if you're a team like FaZe who's been so high, you know, who had the pedigree of always having to be part of the playoffs at the major, who's won stuff before, and all of a sudden you have this big crisis where Kerrigan leaves you didn't qualify for the major. If they can stabilize around top 10, you know, whether that's 9th or 11th or 12th, to me, that'd be great. As long as you make sure that Twistzz and Frozen are competitive. So as I said earlier as well, I just want them to be good enough that they can acquire better personnel, better players, and upgrade on certain of the positions if they need to, in order to become more and more competitive over time. And, you know, JL was free on the market. He decided to sign a standing contract with Vitality. Yeah. I don't know if he's been speaking to FaZe Clan or not, but put JL on the team and I would have higher expectations. I saw Dexter. I think Dexter said himself, maybe, that he was in conversations with FaZe Clan, but they decided to go with J-Bone. And you know, fair enough for taking a gamble on J-Bone. I'd assume that he was significantly cheaper as well, both in terms of acquiring and salary, and maybe less of a risk as well in terms of a visa coming from Denmark. So there's probably a lot of factors that goes into that. But you're telling me that FaZe could have been Frozen, Twistzz, JL, Dexter, and then Jacob maybe, or Netu. Like, all of a sudden I'm interested. All of a sudden I'm looking at FaZe and I'm like, oh yeah, here we got something to work with. But I don't know about you. Right now I'm just looking at that lineup and I'm like, sure, there's elements to it that's nice and there's potential for development, but overall, the raw amount of quality they have at disposal is not good enough to be competing against the likes of, first and foremost, G2, MOUZ, you name it, whoever you want to put 6 to 8, but even more so the likes of Na'Vi, Vitality, etc.
Yeah, the main problem I've got to say that I think they have in this team is I actually think they also are a little bit on the MOUZ train of like, they had some moments that were their best moments at Blast that if you focus on that, I think you can get carried away. Because actually, when I watched their performance, I just said it earlier in the episode, I actually think once they get to Anubis, by the way, I think they should have won that. I think they were up 10-5 or something, mate. And actually, Sprout was on the difficult, like, tricky T side where you have to like make a lot of good calls, you know. And in that moment, I think actually things like, you know, inexperienced players just failed to hit shots and then just couldn't get it over the line, but I actually think they had it almost won. With that said, in the same match, they actually needed to do the cash pick, which looks like they've been practicing a lot. Which, look, that'll help you early on, but eventually everyone's going to play the map and everyone who doesn't ban it is going to have it in series. So that actual early advantage goes away. And I've got to say, if you watch that game, that was the one with the xertioN guy had like that 3K with the deagle around like the forklift on cat. I mean, if he doesn't get that round win, I actually think it just lose 2-0 to Spirit. There isn't even a great Anubis to do. So what I'll throw out here is this. First of all, I'm with you. I actually don't even think they're going to be a top 10 team. I think right now they're 11th. I think that's actually reasonably where they'll be, 11th to 13th, 14th, that sort of a thing. And also, as I'm talking about the players, I'll even add in some other details, which is, I actually think despite everyone loving this performance and being like, right, I guess this is it, cool. This is my FaZe clan. You know what? Compared to season 1, they are much better. They've got a lot more exciting elements there. These are some players that you can look at and go, hey, maybe the xertioN guy's the future. Here's the problem. Because actually those aren't signed players, I think they should actually, in the next 2 tournaments, think about whether they really want to commit to them long term. Because here's the problem people don't realise. First of all, I'll just start with the xertioN guy. He's actually just a player who's standing in technically. He isn't even a loan or a signing as far as I know. If you go and check, he's just been a stand-in for all these tournaments. I think the reason why to speculate is obvious. He was their new coach NKJ's former player in ENCE. So I think in that scenario, they just need a 5th. Right now, whatever financial situation is going on, they just haven't determined. Like, look, if these just standing there, sign him tomorrow, just go. But they haven't. So for now, they're just using him. Look, I get why they're doing that. And I actually think he's an underrated part of why they've been half decent. Because if you ever watch, mate, he is quite literally doing that shit of like, just give me the shittest CT spots. And then also, like, I'll not only just be all right in them, as in like I know how to play them. I'm not going to be a big fragger. But actually, if you ever watch, it's what people said when he first came in as the standing, and it's true. He is good for a clutch every now and then. If you put him in a bunch of 1v1s, he plays them quite smartly, he uses his aim, and he wins the duels. So that is pretty good. With that said, I don't know yet whether they're actually going to commit to him. Like, if you like him, by the way, snap him up now. If you're more questioning, okay, wait, because maybe there could be a better player could come in at that spot. I do think he's going to have issues against big name tier 1 teams. I think it's just really hard to be that sort of player, and he's young. That's also where that whole experience thing's tricky. Like, to be that style of player and be really young, now that's really unusual. Normally those are like veteran players where the reason they're good in those scenarios is they've seen everything. They've seen every possible attack. They know when to, like, you know, be smart, when to make a play and all the rest of it. Then on the xertioN guy, I always remind people this, he's also not signed, he's on loan. So first of all, the real nightmare, I think, if you're a FaZe fan, is this. If you really like him, what if Big does just listen to all these shows and watch these matches and go, wait a minute, I mean, the Grix guy's good, but why are we just giving them on loan our player that we had in our academy team? Like, actually, why don't we just call him back? I assume that's in the contract, if you think how loans work, and just go ahead and sign him. Or if it's one of those like football loans where, you know, if you like them, you can buy them for a certain amount, then FaZe is actually motivated to get on and fucking sign him. Because the xertioN guy, I think, is the main crux of whether or not you think this team could work. Because I think if you go back and watch, especially that series against the Mongols, it looked fucking great, mate. He had some fabulous CT rounds and generally looked like he was a guy who was definitely willing to take the op duel, etc. The problem is, if you go watch him against Spirit, brother, he had like the first 2 maps were really fucking bad, mate. Like, everyone this is one of those series where if you're like a Shiro hater, cover your fucking eyes, because Shiro showed like you might not like his style, but he's a world class player. Like, that's a player who delivers. The xertioN guy only got to perform on Anubis because the rest of the maps he was carried by the others. He was having really bad performance, and I can tell you, mate, he wasn't one of those AWPers in the vein of the Torch where they're not set up, or he was getting AWPs all the time, by the way, and they were saving them for him. They were definitely feeding this. I think, by the way, he's the player they believe in, and actually they do maybe think he's going to be like a good player and they like him. As you say, if the choice was get Dexter, look, on the surface that's crazy. I'm sorry, Dexter is just a proven player. You know, he's an excellent player. Actually, for the level FaZe that, you think he'd walk in the door and be good. As you say though, look, I don't think it costs any money, because as far as I know, he's a free agent. That's what he told me. So signing fee 0. The problem is, one, I'm just going to go ahead and immediately say he wants more salary than fucking xertioN does, the guy who's on big academy. Like, I'm pretty sure the xertioN guy just says yes to anything for that. And if you're a Dexter and you're joining FaZe clan, you've waited waited this long. You want to get that 15, 20k a month salary, mate. That's the whole point of joining the team, because you're going to have pressure on you. So you're going to get what you're worth. And then lastly, you nailed it. The real problem, I think, if you're Dexter is, this is why sitting on the bench was dangerous, because it's not even you specifically, but Russians just have a hard time getting visas. If people watch, you'll see it happen again. Spirit every year turned down 1 or 2 events. As far as I know, it's just based on number of days in Schengen. And then even more crazy is even Kiyosuke, for fuck's sake, guys, has to skip tournaments sometimes for Falcons. And Falcons has more money than God, mate. So if anyone could just, pay the money to make it go away, that wouldn't be a problem. But we all know it has been a problem. And it's even why he wasn't at the fucking bounty in the first place at the beginning of this year. So I think in general, and I've heard it's maybe even going to even harder for Russians. I've heard now they're going to get a problem where before they could get, the X amount of months entry one. Now there's going to be one where it's like a single entry for someone, because obviously they've got this bizarre world situation going on. So in general, if you can just basically pick between 2 players, but it's like you think it's debatable, you're going to pick the non-Russian. I'm sorry, it's just like business right now. The problem I have, like I say, is I've only really seen this guy farm against the bad teams. And then when I saw him, like, it's your chance, xertioN, you're against Spirit, mate, you're on deck. I thought he was a bit underwhelming personally. And then on the other players, this is the other, look, by the way, the guy who's nailing at the moment is twistzz. Looks like he's doing a good job playing. He's doing a good enough job calling that I'm not seeing big holes there. I actually do think one element that I'm a bit concerned about actually is Frozen, believe it or not, because even though his numbers are good, bro, the whole thing of like he's elo held and he's just going to hard carry, he actually looks to me, by the way, like actually he feels elo held, mate. Like some games I watch him and I'm like, he's not bad. Believe it or not, this would be shocking to hear if you didn't watch the game. Sometimes he's just invisible. Sometimes he just, you look on the scoreboard, he has his 16 kills. And yeah, I guess once or twice you saw his name in the kill feed, but you're not seeing like the 1v3 win or like the spread down and forth. Actually, he's just kind of good. He's a good player in this team, but he's not some super duper hard carry. And then the last one, obviously, is Jacob. Now, what's funny is Jacob does do what they originally brought him in a FaZe to do, which is be the guy who's like the aggressive rifler who has to take all the opening entry kill. But the problem is beyond that, I'm with you, mate. If he has to be like my 3rd best player on paper, how am I going to be top 10? How am I ever going to, because again, just think for a second, guys at home, pick any top 10 team. Look, maybe take out 9Z for now, because I think that's a bit fake. I think they're probably like 11th or 12th. And even then, I might be being generous. But you take any of the teams that we've even been critical, MOUZ, right, mate? If the 3rd best player on MOUZ is, I don't know, fucking Torji, that's better than having Jacob. It just is. If I go to, again, I'll do another one. Let's do Aurora, the new Aurora team. Some people like them, some people don't. If the 3rd best player on Aurora, I'm going to assume the best is Wicadia. Then we got Xantares. Then we got, take your pick at that point. Again, I think it's probably better than Jacob. So I'm with you. I actually think the big problem is, here's the thing I'll give them props for. I think they've sort of got the roles now. I think they've got they've picked up players where, put it this way, if you told me 2 months ago the name of these players, I'd be like, oh, fucking out, sell. No, they wouldn't even be top 20. What, some fucking big academy AWP that I've never heard of. And then from Denmark, by the way, but yeah, spoiler, if someone from Denmark are really sick, we'd have heard of that, I'm sure. And then the old guy from the Ents, who no one gave a shit about, except for 2 years ago. Like, no, sell. Actually, it's better than that. And they have in the game shown me some performances, but we're talking about, and this is the problem here, we're talking about FaZe Clan. If this roster was Gamer Legion, hey, I'm in. You know what? Let's see some fucking. If this game, fuck a national. If this roster was 3D Max, hey, all right, I'll watch some games. Yeah, not bad. The problem is, go watch them play against Mongols. They could have lost to Mongols, mate. And Mongols just brought in 2 people I've never heard of before. Like, so I don't know. I have my concerns about FaZe. I think we're actually in a sort of similar place, mate. I think you can be happy if you relate it to season 1 with Carrigan. That was unbelievable how bad they were. People might remember there was a period where they just lost, like, I don't know, fucking 11 out of 12 series or something absurd. Like, they were losing all the time. This isn't that FaZe. But also, if you want it to be the name FaZe Clan, it isn't FaZe Clan. I think you're still like a piece or two away. That's why I even say, if I'm them, I maybe would wait before I just sign those contracts and rush to get these 2 players in the door. I'd maybe wait and maybe pick one of them or see if there still is someone. Because actually, lastly, on the GL thing, listen, I think people know by now, I just think JL's not a very intelligent person. And I think even the way he's phrased this is actually a masterclass of fucking up your own career. Because he keeps phrasing it like he's in Vitality and he's a Vitality player now. It's like, brother, you're standing for 2 events, literally because humans are coming out of their wives and girlfriends. Like, not because you're sick at the game, not because they secretly want a 6-man lineup and you're going to play. None of that is on the cards as far as I can tell. In fact, I even get the vibe, mate, even if JL was the MVP of those fucking tournaments, he's not going to be in Vitality colours in 2026. 27. Like, at that point, he's going to need another team. And here's the thing. I'm certainly not a guy who thinks he should be in an elite team, but I think he should be in a top 10 team. And I'll tell you what, I actually think, here's my hot take, Pim. I think if he joins this team, FaZe Clan, I actually think that would be an appropriate team, and then they could maybe be top 10. Like, I still do think he can bring back some of the old Na'Vi gel and be good at the game. So, actually, I'm with you. That's the one I'm shocked by. It's one thing if you want to go, right, I'm just going to go standing over here a second, see how it goes, get back the flow of tier 1. But I don't think there's a future in Vitality for gel. So if I'm him, these are the sorts of teams actually I would want to get into. I even think they might commit to you. I can't speak for them, obviously. It's just a guess.
Yeah, I agree. And it also, to me, speaks volumes to the ambitions level of FaZe Clan. If I'm not mistaken, was the owner or someone within FaZe quoted saying that we have plenty of money, like we're going to rebuild the squad, we can do whatever we want. Like, if you did that, if you had unlimited money, if you had a big budget, let's not go with unlimited, but you had enough money to build what would be a top 10 team in the world, surely, getting JL, who's no longer on contract in Na'Vi, wouldn't be too much. Surely getting Dexter and giving him 15K a month, if that's what he wants, wouldn't be too much, especially as you said, there's no sign-on fee unless he requires one or whatever. But it's just, to me, it's mixed signals. Because as you're saying, like, you have a player who's technically just a stand-in at the moment in xertioN, and then you have a player that you borrowed, right? It's a very, very cheap lineup you're running. I know Twistzz gets paid an awful lot of money. Frozen gets paid an awful lot of money. But Jacob, J-Bone...
We still don't know,
We don't know, but we kind of do know. I can tell you this much as know from what I know from salaries, etc., etc. You combine those three players, and they don't get anywhere near what Twistzz gets paid every month, right? So it's a very, very cheap lineup to run. So it's a bit of mixed signals for my money. And as I said I think I've voiced my opinion a couple of times. The worst thing that can happen to FaZe Clan, and they are still at risk of doing that, is not being good enough or not being competitive enough or not giving Twistzz or Frozen the personnel that they are, I guess, interested in working with, to a point where they just, stop, bench themselves, don't want to play anymore, or forced to leave. Yes. Jesus, sorry. We've seen Twistzz do that before when he was in Team Liquid to get into FaZe Clan. I wouldn't be surprised if Frozen gets to a point, as you said as well, if he gets to a point where, like, fuck, I could have gone to Na'Vi a year ago, I could have gone to Na'Vi half a year ago, I decided to stay, or I was forced to, like, enough is enough, right? At some point, those players are getting to a position where they're like, I gotta leave now, otherwise I'm wasting another year of my career, right? So the first and final goal of FaZe right now is just to be competitive to a point where you can acquire good talent into a team. And if they fail at doing so, and I think we can set up the bar as well, get a bit concrete for that as well. I don't think being top 15 in the world is enough for FaZe to be attractive for some of the good players to join. I think JL will look at FaZe and then be like, even for me, JL,
I think I might be right.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to be top 10. You need to be at tier 1 tournaments. You need to occasionally make the playoff. And then again, you can make a pretty good case. And this is where the human minds come into play, right? If let's say that I'm a great player. Let's say that I'm JL or whoever else is out there. And I'm looking at FaZe Clan at a tournament and, okay, they made top 8 at EWC with, wait, what? They did that with J-Bone. They did it with Netu. What if I join instead of Netu, right? We're even better. All of a sudden, we're not just going to make top 8. We're going to be there every single time. We're going to get into the semifinal. That's how players are thinking about themselves. They think about how much impact can they have when they join the team instead of the player that they think they're better than. And the only reason and the only way FaZe gets to a point where they can acquire those players is by showing to the world that, hey, we can overperform with a less star-studded lineup, right? And that's a very dangerous game to play, because maybe what we saw at Bounty, maybe that replicates itself, and maybe that's enough of a proving ground for some of the players out there to be like, okay, I'm interested. I want to join FaZe Clan. If they come acquire me, I'm open to the offer. But if we don't see FaZe make a single playoff at a tier 1 tournament, which I think would be a fun one on Polymarket, because I'm inclined to say, no, I don't think FaZe will make a playoff, depending on what tournament it is and what caliber it is, of an S-tier tournament, for the remainder of the season. If they don't, then a lot of players will be like, yeah, even I can't say this shit, and maybe I have a feeling that even if I join, I'm not sure if Frozen is committed to this lineup anymore. Twistzz have said, that he's going to be the in-game leader for as long as FaZe wants him to be the in-game leader. Does that mean that he doesn't want to be an in-game leader?
It's a weird statement, isn't it?
A club man or what? Yeah, I'm like conflicted by that, because I agree with you. I think Twistzz have done a great job, and I think he's still a great player. And I think Twistzz, by all means, if there was an opening, like, he could join pretty much any team in the world and still be viable, to be completely honest. Join a freaking Na'Vi and make them better if that were the case as well. So I think it's a fine game they're playing right now, FaZe Clan, and I'm afraid that if we have this conversation in 4 or 5 months from now, at the end of the season, that they may be in a position where by lowballing themselves, by playing with J-Bone, by running a budget team right now, they may fuck up the one opportunity they have of actually maximizing these 6 months to, again, be relevant for players to join by trying to cheat their way out of it. And if that's the strategy and it works out, fair enough, you saved a lot of money and you still save your product. But if you show me now that the next 4 months, they're not going to make another playoff and teams are not really willing to negotiate with you, and even if they were, the players don't want to join FaZe Clan anyway, then you just fucked up the one opportunity you had by lowballing and by cheaping your way out, by playing with a stand-in, by playing with a borrowed player from big academy, you name it. So I'm still very conflicted, and I'm inclined to say that I don't really believe in this FaZe project at all, which would be annoying to me because I like Frozen, I like Twistzz, and I don't think that they should be playing on a team that, in my mind at the very least, is perceived as negative as FaZe is right now.
If you want the analogy of, when everyone knows when you're in the American hospital and then they have that machine, the EKG machine or whatever it's called, that, the doot, doot, when you see the lines going for the signs of life, right? When the team was bad and didn't qualify to the major, even before Karen left, it was already that was already the flat line. They're dead, right? Now, here's one thing I'll give credit to FaZe. When Carrigan left, I would have just disconnected the machine and sent the body to the morgue. To me, there was nothing left there. So I'll give them credit. This isn't that they're still flatline, and I'd have been wrong, actually, Pimp, to completely disconnect it. But all they've got now is the oh my God, this life's still in there. But here's the difference. They're not fully healthy yet, mate. They're not ready to go. They definitely can't leave the hospital yet. And here's the problem. I'll tie it to what you just said. The one part people are missing is this. They didn't make the final here. They didn't, at a really soft field, win the tournament. Even worse, by the way. I'm feeling pretty good about my performance after the Spirit game, because I'm like, you know what? Spirit's better than us. Should. When I see MOUZ tool them in the final, I'm like, fuck. You know what? Maybe that one, that wasn't as good. And two, actually, I guess we weren't the second best team behind FaZe. Spirit, who the fuck knows? Maybe Spirit was kind of shit at this event and we just didn't beat them anyway. Maybe suddenly changed my perspective. And then the other detail, like you set up there, is, bro, right now, there's still the life signs where maybe, like you said, a good run could convince someone to join. But let's look at the obvious other angle. And the obvious team is Na'Vi, because I don't think Na'Vi just signs random players. I think they only signed Mikaze, who's not known, because they already knew he was in the academy and they knew he'd fit the role they wanted him to play. I think both of those players, Frozen and Twistzz, if they want to, and if Na'Vi want them, in like a month, 2 months, that could just be the move. One of them goes to Na'Vi, bro. And if either of those teams players leave, you may as well, again, just flatline the team and just fucking send the body off, maybe, because at that point, and all I'll say is this, I won't reveal anything secret, but I actually got to talk to someone from FaZe who's in like an executive type position, who was a manager person, and I know them, and they've been there a long time in FaZe, and I won't reveal anything they said, but put it this way, even privately, they would give me absolutely nothing about the financial situation, Pimp. Like, you have to understand, the kind of person I am, or a Richard Lewis in esports, if I'm at an event, bro, and I say to someone, look, off the record, people are saying this, like, that's not really the way it is in your time, they're just going to go, nah, don't, actually, yes, that is the case, and it's like this, but, don't tell anyone, please, or no, that's not the case, stop. And all I'll say is this, the reason that's really suspicious, Pimp, is I was framing it like, fans think this, and they've given up on the team, but, like, if it's true that you guys have money and you can do X and Y, like, off the record, like, could you sign a player? All I'll say is this, that's almost where, when someone in my position, it would benefit them to give me something. So I could come to a show and go, look, I've actually heard behind the scenes. It was just, a few months where there was some conditions with some contracts, but they've freed up the funds. And, that's why they've got, say, a Jacob and a stand-in, because they're going to now wait to the second season, then they're going to go big on the market, and they're just waiting for the right player. If I could do something like that, by the way, that's how you use the media. If no one knows how sports pages work, or those fucking, like, talk shows with talking heads, they're getting fed information like that from the people who it benefits the team that gets out there, but not from them. That I'm getting nothing from them. So I've got to say, I view that as, it's the other way around. The statements they've made are the fake ones for PR, and actually behind the scenes, they've got fuck all money, they're working really limited budgets, and these are the best players that they can get to join the team right now. And if that's true, that's depressing. Now, Speaking of depressing, we've got one more topic that we can do. But first, I will just tell people, in future episodes, we are willing to do a topic as part of the LFN Premium experience, which is, if you subscribe to LFN Premium, it costs $9 a month at lastfreenation.com, but you can get the whole year for $90. It's about $7.50 a month, 7-day money back guarantee, by the way. Then you can actually be someone where we will read out your name and do one topic on each episode of Counterpoints. We didn't have any submitted yet because we've only just launched the feature and people chose not to do it. So if you choose to subscribe, there'll be a way in Discord, you can go into a channel where it'll be like CS topics, just put in there counterpoints and put the topic you want. And if it's an interesting topic or the one that we pick, we will read it out. Also, later at the end of this episode, we will just end on YouTube. But actually, if you're someone who's subscribed, you will get a little exclusive Q&A on this episode where we will answer like 3 or 4 questions again from subscribers. And that'll come up afterwards if you are a subscriber, or the video will end. You'll have to think better of it and wonder if you want to be subscribing. Also, when you subscribe, by the way, you pick your favourite show. If you pick counterpoints, Pimp gets some of the money for this, so you can support Pimp, and he will be more motivated to do extra things like the Q&A thing. So what I'll now swap to is this. There is another poly market, bro. And this one also has relevance from the Blast, which is this one. Will Astralis make a roster change before September? Now, look, obviously, this is being filmed on the 8th of August. They have only got basically like 3 weeks and then a couple of days to do the roster move, if they do it. Also, you look at Blast Bounty, they made it to the semi-finals. They were in position against MOUZ to maybe even win and make the fight. You know, if you want to paint it as nicely as possible, there were some signs pointing up. Whereas, if you remember at the major, this was a team that was looking like absolute cheeks, and they were in a position where there's a reason why people thought it was credible. The rumour that maybe Hooksy is fired from his job. Instead, what they did is they went with personnel changes. They brought in Neo from FaZe as the new coach, and they brought in someone called xertioN, who was the sports psychology trainer. I'm not sure what the exact role she plays, but she was actually with Na'Vi before, if people don't know. They brought in essentially new like coaching staff people instead. That was the change they made. On this topic, at the moment, it's at 16%. There's been times when it was way higher because, understandably, you go way back. You can imagine around the major, people thought definitely going to kick some. All the rumours were maybe they do. Pimp, do they change before September? And would you say yes or no to this specific number?
They won't change before September, and I'll tell you why. And I think you kind of hinted at the coaching staff situation. If I know Neo well, as I think I do, he wants to come in, he wants to assess the team, he wants to assess the players, he wants to see them play at a couple of tournaments before he makes up his mind. And then, you know, let's say that after Blast, after EWC, and maybe a third tournament as well, he then gets a sense of, okay, this is working, this is not working, this player is toxic to the bone, or this player is disrupting the other players, whatnot. So then he will start to suggest to Astralis that I think we should get rid of this player, get another guy instead of that guy, etc., etc. But he won't do that before he's had a full overview, you know, of how they perform, how they interact with each other, how they perform on LAN as well, and what kind of call pits there could be within the lineup. And as you said as well, the first outing they had at Blast Bounty was pretty good. You know, I think that's more than respectable and more than acceptable for Astralis, especially when you consider how the major ended. So I think that's a team that will not make a roster change before September. I'd even be willing to say that if you were to extend it and say, will they make a roster change before or in 2026? I'd be inclined to say no at the moment. I think that's way more up for debate, because then again, 2 or 3 bad tournaments in a row, and you most definitely will make a roster change. But I think Neo is coming in a wavy, calm and composed ways. You know, they want to assess the team, the new coaching staff, the mental coach as well, as you mentioned. You know, probably wants to have a couple of observations about the players, how they deal with pressure, you know, figure out why Hooksy is constantly trying to smash his table whenever he plays Counter-Strike, and see if he can fix that to some degree, or help him with that. But at the end of the day, I don't think Astralis is in a position right now where they're desperate to make a change, or where they're like, you know, often we describe teams as they're one change away from being mega good, or they're one change away from being, you know, a top 5 team again. I think Astralis is just, they're one change away from still being Astralis, so it doesn't really change anything, you know. And if they were, then you look at a guy like Ryu, or you look at some of the Fuzi for that matter as well. But Fuzi had a period, you know, what is it, 3-4 months ago, where he was firing on all cylinders. Ryu was supposed to come in and be not necessarily a star player, but he's definitely better than his stats have suggested in Astralis. So I think if I'm Neo, I'm looking at that guy, I'm thinking, before I want to kick this dude, I want to see if I can get his real potential out of it. So I don't see them changing anything, not before September, and I'd even be willing to say that I'm inclined to say no in 2026, depending on how it goes in the next couple of tournaments, because they do play at EWC as well. And that's a stacked tournament. You know, there's only going to be good teams, double elimination group stage bracket, and I think they need a couple of wins at that tournament to be satisfied. But I also do think that that's possible, you know, depending on who they draw and who they get in a group with. So no, I don't think Astralis will change anything. I think changing coach and changing mental help as well in that regard is big enough of a change for Astralis. And then, as a complete unrelated side note, unfortunately, I had the luxury of being located at the Cologne Major right next to the Astralis practice room. And I can tell you this much, at 2 a.m. every fucking night, they would be sitting in that practice room and they would be laughing, they'd be having fun, they'd be playing. I don't think they played Counter-Strike, they played whatever game they played, World of Warcraft or whatnot, at least having fun in there and just yelling and screaming. So to me, that shows a sense of togetherness as well. They even had a day after they were knocked out from the major as well, where they were being very loud again at 2 a.m., 3 a.m.
Okay, so good vibes in the team.
Good vibes in the team, I was pretty pissed about it because obviously I wanted my sleep, but then again, I couldn't help to be happy on their behalf, that they could still have fun and still have a good time. I also will note, I saw FaZe, was it an hour and a half, 2 hours after they get knocked out from Cologne, which overall was a very disappointing tournament for them. Walked by the room, he was playing deathmatch. I then walked into my room, walked out an hour later, he was still playing deathmatch, right? So he was very much locked in, and clearly he had this whole reaction of, and I know that from my own playing career as well, when things doesn't go your way and when you produce a bad result, there's often two ways of doing it. Either you disconnect and you try to forget about it for a couple of days and then you rejoin the server and then you rejoin the grind, or you go straight back to the practice room and you just sit down, you grind deathmatch and you think about all the times that you wanted to hit a shot and you're going to make sure that's never going to happen again. And just having that sort of personality and having that sort of, there's a role model where the other players can look at and be like, okay, he's still zoned in. He's not okay with how he played, how we got knocked out. I think that's also a great sign of some of that togetherness I felt within Astralis. So that's another reason why I'm going to say no.
I'll also just throw this out there. At the Blast Bounty, because I was on location doing the course, I got to do some interviews with some players, and one I have on my channel on YouTube is with Stair from Astralis, who's obviously the best player. And actually, when I asked him, basically, I cleverly basically sort of asked him, it was Hugsy actually going to get kicked like the rumour said, but I didn't say Hugsy's, I sort of like made it sort of like, was there going to be roster moves? Did you think there would be? Was there like a vibe like that in the team? That's like a way you sort of just get the sense for what it is, because look, if you don't kick the player, it's very likely they're going to say that there was, because then it sows like seeds of, discontent within the team. So all I'll say is this, one thing that was actually quite surprising is people will forget in Astralis that Astralis now has the old like CEO of NIP, the one that was in the notorious era that actually a lot of people hated. It's a guy, Jonas Gunnarsson. He is a Danish guy, people don't know. I know it was actually weird a Dane was in the Swedish team there, but he's in the Astralis now. And I can tell you that basically Stair said that the Jonas guy makes the decisions. It's the org that makes decisions on whether people essentially get fired from there. It's almost like a company. They decide whether they let the employee go and they get another employee. It's not one of those ones where the players go, hey, we want this guy or kick this guy. It's actually implied they don't even get a say, and actually they didn't know. Like they themselves just maybe saw the posts and were like, okay. And then the season came and it was like, oh, welcome your new coach and your new sports psychology. But actually they don't know. And obviously he didn't, because he's smart, he didn't give any hint as to whether he wanted people to get kicked or not. Based on what you're saying, maybe that's not even the case. Maybe actually the vibes are good. They just played some bad CS. So I think the more interesting thing to me is that implies to me that no, they won't make a move. Because if they've stuck with this roster, I mean, I'll just go ahead and say this. If you think about how organizations work, even that NIP era, actually organizations are a lot slower than players. Like players have a bad match, a bad result, and they go, get this guy the fuck out, get this other person in. Orgs are more like, you're looking at a spreadsheet and you're looking at the VRS points and you look at the ranking on HLTV and you're watching this tournament going, hey, we made top 3 to 4. That's a good placing, irrelevant of whether the teams are good. You just go, hey, for Astralis, that's a solid place. I think it's the September part makes me say, I would take no. I would definitely take no here. Even if it happens, I think maybe it's more interesting, like you say, the whole season. Yeah, maybe more towards the end of the season, I could see something happening. Even then, I don't look at Astralis. I think they're an awful lot of money. I don't think people like Ryu and FaZe are costing you mega big salaries. I imagine Astralis also is in a phase of they're a little bit lower down and they're spending cheap salaries. So I also don't think you can get a big name player. So I actually think right now, if the vibes are good, the team's they're not good, but they're all right. I think you just stick with it, especially for the next month or so. Now, that will be the end of Counterpoints if you are not a subscriber. If you are a subscriber, in a second from now, we will do a Q&A.